poor milk seller saves a terrified girl who's lost everything, offering her shelter. But the next morning, a police car pulls up to his door. Shocked and furious, he has no idea what's about to unfold. The twist? It's more dramatic than he ever imagined. In the quiet town of Maplewood, 16-year-old Jack woke up early every morning to help his grandfather, Henry, with their small milk-selling business. Jack's parents had tragically died in a car accident when he was just 10 years old, leaving him with his aging grandfather as his only family. Since that fateful day, Henry had become not just a guardian, but a source of strength for Jack, raising him with love and care, despite the struggles they both faced. Their lives weren't easy. Money was always tight, and Jack had grown accustomed to living with very little. His grandfather's health had been slowly declining over the years, and Jack often found himself carrying the weight of the family's responsibilities. Despite their hardships, Jack had a dream to become a police officer. Inspired by the way his parents had lived selflessly, and fueled by a deep sense of justice after their untimely death, Jack longed to help others in the same way that law enforcement had helped him during his darkest moments. Jack's routine was simple. He would wake up at dawn, help Henry with the morning chores, and then head out to deliver fresh milk to the town's few remaining customers. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept them afloat. Jack often found solace in his work, though his thoughts were always filled with his dreams of a better future. One where he could wear a uniform, protect people, and make a real difference. One chilly afternoon, as Jack was walking down Larkspur Street with a heavy milk crate in hand, something unexpected happened that would change the course of his life forever. As he turned a corner, Jack spotted a young girl, no older than himself, standing on the sidewalk. She looked disoriented and terrified, her body trembling from more than just the cold. Jack noticed the pack of aggressive dogs that surrounded her, snarling and growling, their eyes wild with hunger. Without thinking, Jack's heart raced with adrenaline. He immediately dropped the milk crate and ran toward the girl, shouting at the dogs to scare them off. He grabbed a long stick from the side of the road, waving it in the air, trying to keep the dogs at bay. His breath came in short, panicked bursts, but somehow, he managed to get close enough to the girl to pull her away from the dangerous animals. The dogs, startled by his bravery, began to retreat into the alley, their barking slowly fading as they ran off. The girl collapsed into Jack's arms, clearly shaken and weak from fear and exhaustion. Her hair was tangled, her clothes dirty and torn, and her face pale. Jack knelt beside her, trying to keep her steady, but she was too exhausted to speak at first. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice full of concern. "You're safe now." The girl nodded slowly, her trembling hands clutching at Jack's shirt for comfort. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak and fearful. I don't know where I am. I was with my father, but I can't find him." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked around, completely lost. Jack felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could see how scared she was, and her vulnerability reminded him of himself when he had been younger and lost his parents. His protective instincts kicked in. "Don't worry. I'll help you. You're safe now." Jack gently helped her to her feet, supporting her as they made their way to the nearby bench. He knew he couldn't leave her alone, and he couldn't imagine what she must be feeling right now. "I'm Jack," he said softly, trying to comfort her. "What's your name?" "Sophia," she replied, her voice still unsteady. "My name is Sophia." Jack gave her a small smile, though his concern only deepened. "Sophia, you're safe here. I'm gonna call my grandfather. We'll get you some food, and we'll figure out what to do next." Sophia nodded gratefully, her hands still trembling, though she seemed to calm slightly under Jack's care. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed his grandfather's number. "Grandpa, I need your help," Jack said as soon as the call was picked up. "There's a girl here. She's alone and she's in bad shape. I don't know where her parents are. Can you come help?" Henry, though his voice was tired from age and the illness that had taken hold of him in recent years, responded with concern. "Of course, Jack. I'll be right there. Stay with her." After hanging up, Jack turned his attention back to Sophia. "My grandfather is on his way. He'll take care of you. As they waited for Henry to arrive, Sophia slowly started to open up. "My father is a police officer," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were on our way to visit some relatives when we got separated. I can't remember what happened. I don't know where he is." Jack's ears perked up at the mention of her father being a police officer. It felt like fate had brought them together. Sophia, a girl connected to the very thing Jack aspired to be. He had always dreamed of becoming a police officer, and now, here he was, helping someone whose father was part of the world he so desperately wanted to join. "I'm sorry you're going through this," Jack said softly, "but I promise we'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore." Soon after, Henry arrived, his old truck rumbling down the street. His face softened when he saw the girl sitting beside Jack, and he immediately offered her a kind smile. "Well, looks like you've done something good today, Jack," Henry said warmly. He turned to Sophia. "You're safe now, dear. Come with me. We'll get you settled in at our place." Sophia, though exhausted, managed a small, grateful smile as she followed Jack and his grandfather back to their humble home. As they entered the modest house, Henry immediately set about making the girl feel comfortable, offering her food and a warm blanket. Jack watched the scene unfold with a sense of relief. His grandfather had always been the one to provide for others, even when times were tough, and now he was showing that same kindness to someone in need. After Sophia had eaten and settled into a chair near the fire, she looked up at Jack with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she said again. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack just smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that he couldn't quite explain. This was what he had always wanted, to help people, to make a difference in someone's life. And now he had done just that. But as Jack sat beside her, watching his grandfather carefully attend to her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. Sophia's father, a police officer, and Jack's own dream of becoming one. It seemed like their paths were destined to cross. Little did Jack know that this small act of kindness would set the stage for a chain of events that would change his life forever. And so, Jack's world began to shift. What seemed like a simple rescue turned into something much more. Jack was about to find out just how much his act of kindness could truly transform his future, and Sophia's. The next few days would bring more challenges. But for now, Jack could only wonder what would come next. He had done something good today, but he knew that the road ahead was full of unanswered questions. And Sophia's story was far from over. The days following Sophia's arrival at Jack's house were filled with quiet, unexpected moments of connection. Jack and his grandfather, Henry, took turns keeping an eye on Sophia, who seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. She ate well, her hands stopped shaking, and her voice became clearer, though there was still a shadow of worry in her eyes. She had stopped asking about her father, perhaps out of fear that the answer would be worse than she could imagine. Jack spent his mornings delivering milk to the few customers who still relied on his services. But his mind was often occupied with thoughts of Sophia and her family. He hadn't expected to meet someone like her. A girl who, like him, had faced hardship. Her story about her father, a police officer, had sparked something in Jack. He had always dreamed of becoming a cop, of making a difference, just like the officers who had helped him after the accident that had taken his parents. Now, with Sophia in his life, that dream felt closer than ever. But as the days wore on, Jack's world was about to shift in another way, one that filled him with anxiety and uncertainty. Henry, his grandfather, had been growing weaker for some time. His hands trembled more often now, and Jack noticed that his grandfather struggled to catch his breath when doing simple tasks. Henry, however, never complained. He was a proud man who had lived through many struggles, but Jack knew that something was terribly wrong. One evening, after a long day of delivering milk, Jack came home to find his grandfather sitting in his chair, looking pale and exhausted. The usual spark in Henry's eyes was gone, replaced by a deep weariness. Jack immediately felt the cold grip of fear clutch his chest. "Grandpa!" Jack's voice cracked slightly as he knelt beside Henry. "What's going on? You don't look good." Henry tried to force a smile, but it only made Jack feel more uneasy. "I'm fine, Jack. Just tired. Don't worry about me." But Jack could see through the lie. His grandfather had always been strong, but this wasn't the same. "You're not fine, Grandpa. We need to get you to a doctor." Henry shook his head weakly, his face pale. "No need for that, Jack. I've lived this long. A little exhaustion won't kill me." But Jack wasn't having it. "No, we're going. I'm calling an ambulance." Within minutes, Jack had made the call, his hands shaking as he spoke to the dispatcher. His grandfather's condition had worsened, and Jack feared for the worst. By the time the ambulance arrived, Henry was too weak to move on his own. He was carefully lifted into the vehicle, and Jack climbed in beside him, his heart pounding with fear. He looked over at Sophia, who had been sitting in the living room, quietly watching. "Stay here," Jack told her gently. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Sophia nodded silently, her eyes full of concern. As the ambulance sped down the road, Jack squeezed his grandfather's hand, hoping beyond hope that it wasn't too late. At the hospital, the doctors immediately took Henry into emergency care. Jack was left pacing the waiting room, anxiety crawling through his veins. He had never felt so helpless. The uncertainty of his grandfather's condition pressed on him like a heavy weight, making it hard to breathe. He thought back to the last few years, to all the struggles they had shared, and realized how much he depended on Henry. He was the only family Jack had left. It felt like hours before a nurse finally came to speak with him. She led him to a quiet corner, her face serious. "Your grandfather's condition is critical," she said softly. "He suffered a heart attack, and we need to run several tests to determine the extent of the damage. The surgery to treat this is going to be expensive, and we need to act quickly." Jack's mind went blank for a moment. Expensive? They barely had enough to cover basic expenses, let alone a surgery. He knew they didn't have the money for something like that, and the thought of losing his grandfather without being able to do anything about it made his stomach turn. "How much is it?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse hesitated, then spoke quietly. "The surgery alone will cost thousands of dollars. I'm afraid without it, his chances of recovery are slim." Jack nodded, though inside he was panicking. How was he going to afford that? He had no idea how they were going to come up with that kind of money, and the pressure of the situation seemed too much to bear. Just as Jack was sinking into despair, he heard a familiar voice from across the room. It was Officer David, Sophia's father. He had arrived at the hospital after hearing that his daughter had been found, but upon seeing Jack's troubled face, he approached him with concern. "Jack, what's going on?" Officer David asked, his tone full of understanding. Jack explained the situation quickly, his voice trembling as he mentioned the surgery and the impossible cost. Officer David listened carefully, his expression softening with sympathy. "Jack, you've helped my daughter when she was in need," Officer David said. "Now it's my turn to help you." Before Jack could say anything, Officer David pulled out his wallet and made a call. He spoke briefly to someone on the other end, and then turned to Jack. "I've arranged for the surgery to be covered. Your grandfather's care will be taken care of." Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But how? We don't have that kind of money. How are you going to?" Officer David smiled kindly. "I've got connections in the community. Don't worry about the cost. What matters now is that your grandfather gets the help he needs." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. "Thank you," Jack whispered, barely able to find the words. As Henry was prepped for surgery, Jack stood by his side, holding his hand tightly. Officer David remained with Jack, offering words of comfort and support. It was in that moment that Jack realized just how much his life was beginning to change. What started as a simple act of kindness, helping Sophia, had led him to this point, where not only had he found a connection with Sophia, but he had also found an ally in Officer David, someone who believed in him and his dreams. The hours that followed were long, but when the surgery was over, the doctors came to tell Jack that his grandfather was stable. The relief was overwhelming, and Jack felt the weight of the situation lift, even though he knew it wasn't over yet. Henry still had a long road to recovery. As Jack sat with his grandfather, watching him rest peacefully, he looked at Officer David, who had stayed by his side the entire time. The police officer had not only saved his grandfather's life, but had also shown Jack that his dream of becoming a police officer wasn't so far out of reach. And Jack knew without a doubt that his future, his path, was beginning to take shape. The days following Henry's surgery were filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Jack stayed by his grandfather's side as he slowly recovered, but his mind was also focused on the incredible turn his life had taken. Officer David's intervention had been nothing short of a miracle. With the surgery paid for and his grandfather beginning to heal, Jack found himself filled with a new sense of hope, one that was also closely tied to his desire to become a police officer. Every day, Jack woke up early to tend to the milk deliveries, but now, his routine was tinged with a deeper purpose. He would work hard, not just to make ends meet, but with a renewed belief in his future. Officer David had made it clear that he saw potential in Jack, and Jack was determined to prove him right. The police officer's guidance, his words of encouragement, had sparked something inside him, a drive he hadn't felt before. One afternoon, as Jack was heading back from his rounds, he noticed Sophia standing by the porch, looking out at the horizon with a distant expression. It had been a few weeks since she had come to stay with them, and during that time she had grown a lot more comfortable with Jack and Henry. They had even become close friends, sharing quiet moments and stories about their pasts. But Jack could tell that Sophia, like him, was still carrying a weight on her shoulders. Her father's absence weighed heavily on her, and though she tried to hide it, Jack could see it in her eyes. "Hey," Jack said as he approached her. "What's on your mind?" Sophia turned toward him with a faint smile, though Jack could tell it wasn't genuine. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about my dad. He's a police officer, but I don't even know where he is. I keep telling myself he's out there, doing his job, but it's hard." Jack understood all too well the ache of having someone you loved missing. He had felt it when his parents had passed away. "I know it's tough, Sophia, but he's out there somewhere. I can feel it. You'll find him." She nodded slowly, grateful for his words but still uncertain. Jack could tell that she was clinging to hope, but the uncertainty was a constant struggle. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. "You know, with everything that's happened?" Sophia sighed. "I don't know. I feel like everything I want to do is tied to him, being a police officer like him. But I don't even know if that's something I can do alone." Jack smiled, the familiar spark of inspiration lighting up his heart. "I think you can. You've got the heart for it. Maybe we both could. You, me, and my dream to join the force. We could do it together." Sophia's eyes softened. Maybe you're right, Jack." That moment marked a turning point in both their lives. Jack realized that his dream was no longer just a personal one. It had become a shared goal, one that was now intertwined with Sophia's own journey. The two of them had suffered losses, but through their shared experiences, they had found hope and a sense of purpose in each other. As Jack continued to work hard and save money, he began to think more seriously about his future. He knew that becoming a police officer wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and sacrifices along the way. But Jack also knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had Sophia's friendship, his grandfather's support, and now the encouragement of Officer David. One day, as Jack was finishing up a delivery, he received a call from Officer David. "Hey, Jack," the voice on the other end of the line said, "I've been talking to the academy. They're willing to give you a chance. With your work ethic, your passion, you've got the potential. But it's up to you now. You've got to take the first step." Jack's heart leapt in his chest. This was it. The opportunity he had been waiting for. The dream he had held onto for so long was no longer a distant thought. It was within his reach. "I'm ready, Officer David. I'll do whatever it takes." And so, with the support of those around him, Jack's journey toward becoming a police officer began. It wasn't just about wearing a uniform or catching criminals. It was about serving others, protecting his community, and honoring the memory of his parents. It was about becoming the person he always knew he could be. As Jack looked at Sophia, who now stood beside him with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, he knew that together, they would face whatever came next. The road ahead would be challenging, but with perseverance, hope, and a little kindness. There was nothing they couldn't overcome. Months passed, and Jack's journey toward becoming a police officer continued. The long hours spent delivering milk were now paired with late-night study sessions, and each day brought him closer to his goal. The police academy was tough, but Jack's determination never wavered. He thought of his parents, his grandfather's recovery, and his promise to help others. His dream, once distant and uncertain, was now within his reach. During this time, Jack and Sophia grew even closer. She had decided to follow in her father's footsteps as well, applying to the academy herself. The two of them often studied together, supporting each other through the tough days. Jack had become not only her best friend but a symbol of strength. Sophia's father, Officer David, remained a guiding figure in their lives, offering wisdom and advice, but he always encouraged them to follow their own paths, even though he had hoped Sophia would eventually join the force with him. Finally, the day Jack had been working toward arrived. He stood tall in his police academy uniform, the weight of his parents' memory in his heart and the support of his grandfather and Sophia at his side. The feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming, but it wasn't just about becoming a police officer. It was about the journey, the people who had helped him along the way, and the lessons he had learned about perseverance and kindness. Sophia, who had also made it through the academy, stood beside him in the graduation ceremony. Their eyes met across the crowded room, a silent understanding passing between them. They had both made it. They had both overcome the hardships and fears that once seemed insurmountable. And now, they were not only partners in their shared dream but in life. After the ceremony, Officer David approached them both, his face full of pride. "You two did it," he said, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "I knew you had it in you." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Officer David. We couldn't have done this without you." Sophia, standing beside Jack, added, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "Yeah," Jack said softly. "And this is just the beginning." As they walked together into their new lives, Jack knew that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But with the strength of his grandfather's love, the kindness he had shown others, and the unwavering support of Sophia and Officer David, he felt ready to face whatever came next. They had turned their struggles into a purpose, and together, they were going to make a difference. The future, once uncertain, now felt like a promising adventure, a chance to help, to protect, and to live out the dreams that had been born from the darkest of times.